parents can see it. Okay, so we're currently streaming on live stream. I apologize for the technology issues. My name is Kyle Mayers. I'm with the Boulder County Bar Association. We're helping to put on the mock trials. Our judge for this our presiding judge for this session, Judge Butler, is having some technical difficulties logging in. So we're currently streaming. Dee Dee, I'm going to make
Parents
you
can see it.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to make
So
you,
we're currently streaming on live stream. I apologize for the technology issues. My name is Kyle.
Okay. Dee Dee, I'm going to make you the host again.
Okay.
I'm going to reach out to Judge Butler. He may be having some login issues, and I'm going to make sure he can log in properly. So Dee Dee, I'm making you the host.
I'm happy to host.
Okay. I'm going to leave the chat. You guys are streaming to the parents and everyone at home. And ladies and gentlemen, we'll get this figured out in just a couple minutes. I apologize for the inconvenience. I'm leaving now. The scoring judges do have my contact information. They need it. We'll get Judge Butler in as soon as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to make you the host. Okay.
Should I start letting people in?
Yes. So anyone that should be letting in, please let them in. And we're going to work on getting Judge Butler back connected to your courtroom. But for the moment, you are the host and you are the presiding judge.
Okay. And we were just about to, we were in the middle of the direct examination of the officer.
Okay. I would say pick up exactly where you left off. And then once we get Judge Butler in, knock on wood, then he can just take back over.
Is everybody in that needs to be in? I mean, I'm not supposed to see anybody but the current participants, right? Just the examiner and the witness?
Correct.
Okay, just want to make sure I was seeing who I needed to see.
Yep.
That's good.
I'm
Okay.
going to turn my camera and mic off, but I'll jump back in once I have an update on Judge Butler.
Okay.
Thank you, Judge Mallard.
Or use the chat.
Sure.
I'll use the chat. So thank you, Judge Butler or Judge
Sure.
Mallard.
That's okay. I'm happy. Let's see. Ms. Wu, I think you were acting as the person doing the direct examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
Can you remind me where exactly we were when we broke?
Your Honor, I believe when Judge Butler left, I was in the middle of preparing to tender Detective Markowitz as an expert. However,
Right.
I think he left the meeting before, in the middle of that.
Yeah, I remember you tendering him as an expert. You specified what areas. So is there a stipulation that he's going to be admitted as an expert without objection?
Yes.
Okay, so he's so qualified. I'm ruling now. He's so qualified. You may continue.
Now, Detective Markowitz, I would like to discuss what happened on March 6, 2020. You say you were called to a crime scene. When were you called to the crime scene?
I responded to a call and arrived at the home around 2:20 at 444 South Flower Street.
What did you see when you first arrived?
When I got to the home, I saw uniformed officers had already secure the scene, and through the open front door, I saw the victim, Mackenzie Brackman, a criminal defense attorney, lying in a pool of blood with a big blood stain on his back and a large knife on the floor beside him. I also observed a ring door camera to the side of the front door.
What did you observe inside the home?
Inside of the kitchen, I observed a knife block on the counter with a large empty slot, as well as a drawer open filled with knives. I observed a plate on the floor shattered and a chair at the table tipped over. And down the hall, I observed blood everywhere, blood drops on or near the victim and blood splatter on the wall and even the ceiling.
Ms. Burnett, could you please share Exhibit 3 on the screen? Now, Detective Marquis, could you please identify Exhibit 3?
Yes, this is a photo of the stab wound.
Could you please identify Exhibit 5?
Yes. This is a photo of the knife at the crime scene.
And are each of these fair and accurate representations of the crime scene as you saw them?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 901, the expert has authenticated and identified Exhibits 3 and 5. I now move to enter Exhibit 3 into evidence.
Any objection?
Oh,
Oh,
I
there.
got it now.
Okay.
Sorry.
No worries.
My computer crapped out and now I'm on my iPad. So sorry, folks. But I figured you'd take over. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Any objection or voir dire?
Yes, Your Honor. Under Rule 4 of 3, we object as these photographs must be excluded because their probative value is substantially outweighed by a danger of unfair prejudice. In this case, the pictures are more prejudicial than probative because they are likely to inflame the passions of the jury. Moreover, the pictures are duplicative and, never mind that last sentence.
Any brief response?
Yes, Your Honor, these pictures are not more prejudicial than probative as they demonstrate where exactly the body was and what exactly happened to Mr. Brackman.
Objection is overruled. The jury will be cautioned that what weight they give to any evidence will be determined after you've heard all the evidence. It should not unnecessarily give any additional weight just because a particular photograph or evidence is more graphic than something else. You may continue.
Now, Detective Markowitz, what did you observe in Exhibit 3?
Exhibit 3 shows where Mr. Brackman was brutally stabbed.
What did you observe in Exhibit 5?
Exhibit 5 shows the knife at the crime scene, and it's clearly covered in blood.
Ms. Burnett, could you please stop sharing? Now, Detective Markowitz, how did you begin your investigation?
In my experience, cell phones are a great way to figure out a person's life. So I began by downloading the contents of Mr. Brackman's cell phone and was able to get a hold of his ring count data and passwords and went through the videos captured on March 6th.
Ms. Burnett, could you please share Exhibit 12? Now, Detective Markowitz, could you please identify Exhibit 12?
Yes, this is a video of the perpetrator at the back door.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of the video as you saw it?
It is.
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 901, the expert has authenticated and identified Exhibit 12. I now move to enter Exhibit 12 into evidence.
Any objection or voir dire?
No objections, Your Honor.
Thank you. The document or video, is admitted.
Detective Markowitz, what is seen in Exhibit 12?
Exhibit 12 shows the perpetrator entering Mr. Brackman's home through the back door.
Ms. Burnett, could you please stop sharing? Now, Detective Markowitz, what does this mean for your investigation?
In my expert opinion, between the evidence at the crime scene and the ring video, it is clear that the perpetrator entered Mr. Brackman's home through the back door, and Mr. Brackman had engaged with the intruder and Mr. Brackman was fatally stabbed.
So then what was the next step in your investigation?
I finished downloading the contents off Mr. Brackman's phone and found many texts and emails linked to mock trial. I found out he was a mock trial coach for a local high school.
What is mock trial?
Mock trial, to my understanding, is an extracurricular activity, in this case high school, where students mock illegal trial.
And did you investigate mock trial?
I did. I wanted to see who Brackman was, and I got all the contact info for the students.
Who was the first student you contacted?
The first student was Alex Cifuentes. I learned about a text exchange between Ms. Cifuentes and another student named Avery Becker over the phone. And after interviewing Ms. Cifuentes, I received screenshots of the text exchange the following day.
Ms. Burnett, could you please share Exhibit 14 on the screen? Now, Detective Markowitz, could you please identify Exhibit 14?
Yes, these are the screenshots I received.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of the screenshots that you received?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 901, the expert has authenticated and identified Exhibit 14. I now move to enter Exhibit 14 into evidence.
Any objection or voir dire?
Yes, Your Honor. The defense objects to the omission of these text messages under hearsay and the best evidence rule. Under Rule 801, this is an out-of-court statement before being offered for the truth of the matter. Under Rule 1002, an original writing, recording, or photograph is required in order to prove its content. In this case, these are not the original text, but rather screenshots. In addition, under Rule 1003, these copies cannot be omitted because under Rule 1003, there's a genuine question about the original's authenticity because we believe the texts may have been fabricated.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. As you can see in these text messages, the green bubbles are the defendant's statements, and pursuant to Rule 801 D2, those are not by definition hearsay as they are statements of party opponent. The green bubbles are statements made by Ms. Cifuentes, and those statements are not offered for the truth of the matter asserted and are offered to show the responses that the defendant said in response to Ms. Cifuentes. Regarding the defense's objections to authenticity and copies, the authenticity of this document goes to the weight of the evidence being given, not to the ability of the evidence to be admitted.
Thank you. The court will overrule the objection, admit the document. What weight the jury chooses to give to the evidence will be determined after all of the evidence has been admitted. You may continue.
Yes, Your Honor. Now, Detective Markowitz, what is shown in Exhibit 14?
From the text exchange, you can see that that Becker, after being kicked off the mock trial team, says, "I'm going to wait until he's at work, then break in and trash it. That'll show him." He referring to Mr. Brackman and it referring to Brackman's home.
Ms. Burnett, could you please stop sharing the exhibit? Now, what was the next thing that you did?
Well, after this, I immediately contacted Avery Becker to set up an interview.
Did you ever meet with Ms. Becker?
I did not. I was stopped by the attorney. However, I did obtain call detail records for Becker's cell phone for March 6, 2020.
What are call detail records?
Call detail records, or CDRs, record call and text activity from a person's phone. So through them, I'm able to see when the communication was made, the numbers involved in the communication, and most importantly for this trial, the specific cell tower antenna the communication went through, which is cell tower data.
Did you do anything with the defendant's cell tower data?
Yes, I collected it, translated, and then created a diagram.
Ms. Burnett, could you please share Exhibit 16 on the screen? Now, Detective Markowitz, could you please identify Exhibit 16?
Yes, this is the diagram I created based off of Becker's call detail records.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of the diagram that you created?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 901, the expert has authenticated and identified Exhibit 16. I now move to enter Exhibit 16 into evidence.
Any objection or voir dire?
Yes, Your Honor. Under Rule 801, we have no objection to the map itself. However, the blue line is hearsay as it purports to be a statement of Ms. Becker's movements.
Response?
Your Honor, the blue line is not by definition hearsay as it would be a statement of party opponent, which is the defendant, Ms. Becker.
May I respond, Your Honor?
You may.
On the contrary, the blue line being drawn is a statement made not by the defendant, but by Detective Markowitz being offered to prove the truth of the matter asserted, which is the alleged movements of Avery Becker. By this definition, it is, in fact, hearsay.
The detective is allowed to mark on the exhibit and can be cross-examined as to the foundation or knowledge as to why certain marks were made. The weight, again, will be determined by the jury at the conclusion of all the evidence. I will admit the exhibit at this time. You may continue, counsel.
Now, Detective Markowitz, what is shown in Exhibit 16?
Exhibit 16 shows the defendant's house, Brackman's house, and the cell towers the defendant's phone was connecting to throughout a 35-minute period.
Ms. Burnett, could you please stop sharing the exhibit? Detective Markowitz, is the defendant here today?
They are.
Will the defendant please turn on their camera?
That is the defendant, Avery Becker.
Thank you. Now, what is your expert opinion given the text messages?
In my expert opinion, based upon the text messages, the defendant was clearly upset with Mr. Brackman and planned to trash Brackman's house in retaliation for being kicked off the mock trial team.
What is your expert opinion given the cell tower data?
In my expert opinion, the cell tower data places Avery Becker, the defendant, around the scene of the crime at the time of the brutal murder.
No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Detective Markowitz.
Good afternoon.
Let's start with the crime scene. You arrived at the crime scene and observed a ring camera?
I did, yes.
The person observed from the video on March 6th was wearing gloves, a hoodie, and a Halloween mask?
That is true.
So they weren't showing any identifiable features other than height and build?
From the ring videos, you can gather the general build of the perpetrator. However, they do not reveal the identity.
So that is a yes, they were not showing any identifiable features.
Yes.
Of ring build, both of which could be modified by padding or clothing choices?
They were wearing hoodies, so yes.
And this was a large part in your conclusion that the perpetrator was Avery Becker?
As I viewed the ring footage, it was a part of something that went through my investigation, yes.
You collected photographs of the blood splatter in the crime scene, correct?
There were photographs.
But these photographs are corrupted and cannot be accessed?
Currently, right now, that is what happened.
So you have only your memory to support your interpretation of the blood splatter?
As I was there at the crime scene, it is, yes, as my memory.
And this is an area you admit in your statement you have no expertise in?
Yes, that
Objection,
is.
Your Honor. Improper impeachment.
Overruled. I'll allow the question on cross-examination. You may continue.
All right, let's move on to the cell phone and texts. You tracked Avery Becker's phone's movement from March 6th,
Yes.
but you don't know who was in possession of the phone?
The phone number, the data showed that the phone number was belonging to Avery Becker.
But you don't know who was in possession of the physical phone itself?
I do not know who was holding it, but as it is Avery Becker's phone, it was Avery Becker.
All right. And you noted that the repeated calls and texts received from Taylor Perkins all went unanswered?
That is what the data showed. It showed that the calls were a very short duration.
But the only explanation for Ms. Becker failing to answer those calls or texts was that she must have been busy committing the crime?
I do not know why Ms. Becker did not answer for the texts or the calls. However, that is my best conclusion based upon the evidence I've reviewed.
All right, and you never considered that the pattern of multiple calls and texts was in line with a lost phone?
I'm sorry, will you repeat your question?
You never considered that the pattern of multiple calls and texts was in line with a lost phone?
The data showed that the calls were unanswered as well as the texts.
And you didn't, that was not my question, Detective Markowitz. My question was that you did not consider that this pattern was in line with a phone that was lost.
That is a consideration. However, that's just not what the data showed.
All right. And you didn't obtain cell tower records to determine the location of the phone from the day before, when Avery Becker claims the phone was lost, to see if it in fact was lost?
The day of the murder was March 6th, and that's the day I got the records for.
That is a no. You did not obtain cell tower records.
Yes, that is a no.
And you say you received screenshots of incriminating texts from Alex Cifuentes,
I did receive screenshots from Ms. Fuentes, yes.
but you never saw the original versions of the texts?
I spoke to Ms. Fuentes the previous day, and I did not see the original text. However, I received the screenshots.
That is a no. You have never seen the original versions.
Yes.
Objection, Your Honor, asked and answered.
Well, I won't sustain it for asked and answered, but I'll sustain it for the form of the question because it really was a statement,
All right.
not a question. If you'd like to rephrase, counsel, you may do so.
No need. I'll move on, Your Honor. This is because Ms. Cifuentes didn't bring her phone to the interview,
Ms. Fuentes did not bring her phone to the interview.
and you found it very odd that a teenager came to the interview without their phone, correct?
I don't usually see teenagers without their cell phones, so it was strange. However, a lot of people, or some people, get nervous meeting with the police, and so that could be a reason.
Of course. However, you never followed up and secured the original text evidence?
The text messages were sufficient after my interview with Ms. Fuentes.
And you would agree that it's standard procedure to preserve the most original versions of decisive evidence, such as the texts?
As a police officer, yes, that is.
So you don't know for certain that these text messages are authentic?
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation. The question calls for speculation.
Overruled. If the witness knows, she may answer, but do not guess or speculate. If you don't know, it's okay to say, I don't know. Do you need the question rephrased or repeated?
Yes, Your Honor.
Please
Okay.
restate a question.
So you don't know for absolute certain that these text messages are authentic?
I had spoken to Ms. Fuentes the previous day, and we had spoken about these messages, and from that, the text message or the screenshots are authentic.
I was not asking whether you had spoken to Ms. Cifuentes. I was asking whether or not you knew for absolute certain that they were authentic.
Objection, Your Honor. Objection, Your Honor. The witness has already answered counsel's question.
The answer given was not directly connected to the question. Please listen to the question and only answer the question asked. Do you need it repeated or restated?
Yes, Your Honor.
Go ahead, counsel.
So you don't know for absolute certain that these text messages are authentic?
I do not know for absolute certain.
All right, thank you. Now, let's talk a little bit about what you didn't do. You state in your witness statement that you did consider that the murder could have been the work of a disgruntled ex-client.
That was a theory before my investigation. Yes.
I'm sorry. Blair Rollins is another suspect in this case, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
You've listened to the audio recording of Blair Rollins' father swearing revenge against Brackman?
Yes, I have.
Your Honor, permission for co-counsel to publish to the jury what has already been admitted as Exhibit 16?
You may publish any admitted exhibit.
All right, and in regards to Exhibit 16, Ms. Rollins' house is very close to that of Ms. Becker?
As you can see from the map, yes, they do seem relatively close.
So the route from either house to Mr. Brackman's would follow a similar route to your blue line?
You could see the routes would be similar. However, from the Rollins house, they could take a different route.
Of course, but as this blue line is not a 100% concrete identification of the route, it could take a similar one.
Yes.
And you don't have cell tower records that determine the location of Blair Rollins or her phone at the time of the crime?
I do not, as Blair was not my suspect at the moment of when I collected the call detail records.
So that is a no. You do not have cell tower records that determine the location of Blair Rollins.
That is true.
All right. I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you. Redirect.
Yes, Your Honor, briefly. Now, Detective Markowitz, why didn't you collect cell tower records for Blair Rollins?
My investigation had not called for the collection of Blair Rollins call detail records, as had followed that lead and did not provide further evidence into the suspect.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Thank you. You may call your next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like to request a brief time check.
Certainly. Can we get a time check, please, folks?
You have
For our
15
time.
minutes and 22 seconds left.
Thank you. Call your next witness.
Your Honor, the state calls Kyle Kuzak as its next witness.
Thank you. All right. You've already been administered the oath. You may proceed whenever you're ready, counsel.
Good afternoon, Ms. Kuzak. Could you introduce yourself to the jury?
Hello, my name is Kyle Kuzak.
Ms. Kuzak, why are you here today?
I'm here today to give my expert opinion on the reconstruction of the crime scene based on the evidence collected and offer my conclusion about what happened in the house on the day that the victim was murdered.
What is your occupation?
I'm a crime scene reconstruction investigator for the Colorado Bureau of Investigation.
What do you do as a CSR?
As a crime scene reconstructionist, I specialize in analyzing and reconstructing crime scenes. By looking at the evidence in the home, I create a visual picture of what happened.
Could you tell the jury about your experience in this field?
I've been a crime scene reconstruction investigator for 19 years, so I've analyzed all kinds of crime scenes.
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 702, testimony by experts, and 703, basis of experts' opinion testimony, I am tendering Ms. Kyle Kuzak as a qualified expert witness in the fields of analysis and reconstruction of crime scenes.
Any objection or voir dire?
Yes, Your Honor, the defense would like to voir dire.
You may.
I would like to start with your qualifications. You stated today that you have experience as a crime scene investigator.
Correct, I have 19 years of experience as a crime scene reconstruction investigator.
But you haven't provided a resume or CV to document where you worked?
No, I have not.
And no statement or record of university attended?
I consider my on-the-job training enough to qualify me.
No indication of the number of homicides or burglaries you've investigated?
Again, I would consider 19 years enough experience.
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 702, we object to this witness being admitted as an expert on the grounds that they have not provided any evidence that they possess the knowledge, skill, experience, training, or education to be considered such.
Thank you. Rule 702 of the Colorado Rules of Evidence does allow anyone with special knowledge, skill, education, training, or experience who is qualified in their field to testify as an expert witness and offer opinions. The weight that the jury determines to give to the witness is that of the weight of any other witness, lay or expert. The court will admit the witness as an expert witness. You may proceed with your examination.
Ms. Kuzak, can you tell the jury about your CSR process?
I begin with two main principles. I assume that every case is going to trial, and I walk into a case with a mindset of future reconstruction. I then approach each case in 5 parts.
Could you list those 5 parts for the jury, Ms. Kuzak?
First is recognition and documentation. Second is collection of evidence. Third is evaluation of evidence. Then fourth is hypothesis and testing. And finally, the reconstruction.
Now let's talk about the evidence you gathered. How did you gather it?
I visited the crime scene after it was processed, and I looked at some evidence post-processing at the lab.
And what evidence of importance did you obtain?
Evidence of importance to my latter conclusions were what are marked as exhibits 6, 8, 9, 18, and the blood splatter on the scene.
Ms. Kuzak, would you be able to recognize these documents if I show them to you?
Yes, I would.
Ms. Soma, could you bring up Exhibit 9? Ms. Kuzak, could you identify Exhibit 9?
Yes, Exhibit 9 is the photo of the broken plate on the floor next to the victim's kitchen.
Ms. Soma, would you bring up Exhibit 18? Ms. Kuzak, would you identify Exhibit 18?
Yes, Exhibit 18 is the photo of the scuff marks immediately inside the victim's back door.
Ms. Soma, would you bring up Exhibit 6? Ms. Kuzak, would you identify Exhibit 6?
Exhibit 6 is the photo that I took of the knife at the processing lab.
Ms. Soma, would you bring up Exhibit 8? Ms. Kuzak, would you identify Exhibit 8?
Yes, Exhibit 8 is the photo of the knife block in the victim's kitchen.
And are all of these fair and accurate representations of these images?
They are.
Your Honor, pursuant to Rule 901, the witness has authenticated and identified Exhibits 9, 18, 6, and 8. Your Honor, I move to admit Exhibit 9 into evidence.
Any objection or voir dire?
No objection.
9 is admitted. You may continue.
Your Honor, I move to admit Exhibit 18 into evidence.
Are you going to collectively just ask to admit all these exhibits you just went through?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right. Let's have a sort of a collective objection, if there are any, on all of these photographs. Any objections or voir dire on any of these photographs?
No objections.
All right. Those exhibits are admitted. You may continue.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Kuzak, why was Exhibit 9 significant in your analysis?
The broken plate was the first sign of the struggle that I observed.
Could you explain Exhibit 18 to the jury?
I looked at the scuff marks immediately inside the back door. In my expert opinion, the scuff marks, broken plate, and blood splatter together indicated the path of the struggle.
And then what conclusions did you draw from Exhibit 8?
The photo of the knife block very clearly shows a missing slot for a chef's knife. Such knife was eventually identified as the murder weapon.
In your expert opinion, how was this weapon introduced to the scene?
In my expert opinion, the victim searched through his kitchen and eventually decided on the larger knife from the block to defend himself.
And what was the progression of the struggle that day?
The struggle began immediately when the intruder entered the back door and moved to the kitchen table. Eventually, the intruder got a hold of the knife. In my expert opinion, the victim and intruder were in very close proximity.
What happened next?
The most likely situation is that the intruder was being constrained by the victim in a bear hug when the intruder reached over and stabbed the victim in the upper back area.
Now, would you tell the jury why the blood splatter was significant in your analysis?
There was a series of blood droplets leading from the kitchen table to the front door. The blood splatter was more than sufficient to show what happened in my expert opinion.
Now let's discuss the murder weapon that you've mentioned. What is shown in Exhibit 6?
At the bottom of this photo, it shows us measurements, so the size of the knife. The blade measures 7.5 inches, and the maximum width would be 2.5 inches.
What's the significance of this?
This matches the same type and shape of knife that would fit in the block.
And where was that knife eventually found?
The murder weapon was eventually found behind the victim's body.
Ms. Kuzak, what is your expert opinion on what happened on the day Mackenzie Brackman was murdered?
My expert conclusion is that this was a planned burglary gone bad that led to the tragic and brutal murder of the victim with the very knife he picked up to defend himself.
Thank you, Ms. Kuzak. No further questions at this time, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Cross-examination.
I'd like to begin with your conclusions in this case. You stated that this was clearly a planned burglary gone wrong,
Yes, that was the most likely conclusion.
but then you stated that the intruder likely chose the time of day for your own imagined reason,
That was the most likely reason.
and you stated that the victim would surely have heard the back door slide open, but you don't know that definitely, do you?
Again, combined with all the other evidence, that's the most likely conclusion.
Let's talk about your review of the crime scene evidence. Your analysis of blood spray and cast-off blood splatter droplets were based off of photos taken by the police?
I was on the scene, so I did observe the blood splatter firsthand, but there were also photographs, yes.
So that was a yes. Your analysis of blood spray and cast-off blood was based off of photos.
Not necessarily as I was on the scene, but I did observe photos as well.
All right. And those photos of the blood splatter were corrupted, so your analysis cannot be independently verified.
Unfortunately, that part of my analysis was corrupted. However, I have many other pieces of evidence supporting my conclusion.
You also admit that you were not able to recreate all event segments.
Unfortunately, it's sometimes hard to create every single piece since we don't have all of the evidence in the world in any case.
And you had evidence that you could not place.
That is always true, yes.
You dismiss the likelihood that the victim was surprised because he owned a Ring app,
Yes, that was part of my conclusion.
but you're speculating that the victim had his phone.
That was the most likely conclusion when combined with the other evidence.
You also speculate that scuff marks on the floor of the kitchen are evidence of a struggle for the knife.
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Overruled. If the witness can answer the question without speculating, she may do so.
Would you like me to re-ask the question?
Yes, please.
All right. You also speculate that scuff marks on the floor of the kitchen are evidence of a struggle for the knife.
When I look at the scuff marks, broken plate, and blood splatter, there was clearly a struggle.
But you cannot say for certain when those scuff marks were put there.
No, but when combined with other pieces of evidence, it makes sense.
Let's move on to other possible theories. The expert witness for the defense, Professor Van Owen, gave a statement that contradicts your conclusions in this case.
That's correct.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Overruled. This is an expert witness, and anything that was used to rely on to form the opinions, which could include other expert opinions, may be explored. You may continue with your cross.
You admit that Professor Van Owen's conclusions are outside your own expertise?
Part of his conclusions, or her conclusions, my apologies, were outside my expertise. However, part of mine were out of hers as well.
But in your comprehensive, thorough investigation, you didn't note in your witness tracking sheet that Avery Becker claimed to have been set up by the two other suspects in the case?
I did not claim that, no.
Objection, Your Honor. These facts are not in evidence.
Overruled. You may redirect on it. Go ahead, counsel.
Shall I continue?
Please.
Alrighty. You didn't note that Taylor Perkins also supported this theory?
It wasn't necessary for my reconstruction.
You list Blair Rollins as a suspect in your witness information tracking sheet?
Yes, I had multiple suspects.
But you didn't note that the route from Blair Rollins' house would match the cell tower information provided by Detective Markowitz?
It potentially could have, but that wasn't where the evidence led us.
Are you aware that there is a recording of Jonathan Rollins promising to get revenge on Mackenzie Brackman?
I was aware of that recording, yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Redirect examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Briefly. Ms. Kuzak, why were you not able to recreate every event segment?
As it is in every case, I do not have all of the evidence in the world. I can't control how much evidence I have. So I control what I do with what I do have, and I can't solve everything with limited evidence.
Your Honor, pardon me, Ms. Kuzak, and why was it not important that every single piece of evidence could not be placed within the bigger picture?
So it's like when you're putting together a puzzle. If you're missing 5 pieces, you still know what the puzzle is. I could see from the evidence that I had what happened, and it was clearly a planned burglary gone bad.
No further questions, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. Prosecution may call your next witness.
Your Honor, at this time, I would like to request a brief time check.
Certainly.
You have 9 minutes and 5 seconds left.
Your Honor, at this time, the prosecution calls its third and final witness, Alex Fuentes, to the stand.
All right, thank you. You're already under oath. Whenever you're ready, you may proceed.
Good afternoon, Ms. Fuentes. Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
Good afternoon. My name is Alex Fuentes, and I am a senior at Colorado High School.
Why are you here today?
I'm here today because I know Avery Becker personally, and from my experience, when she says she's going to do something, she always does it, no matter the consequences.
Let's talk about mock trial. How do you know the defendant from mock trial?
Well, Avery and I have been on the same team for 3 years, and Coach Brackman was our coach for our team, and we've been in practices together almost all the time.
What was the defendant like as a teammate?
Avery was amazing at mock trial. She had this one-of-a-kind talent. She could just make anything up and make it totally believable. She often fooled the jury into thinking it to the point of being like putty in her hands. It was amazing.
Did anything stand out to you about the relationship between the defendant and Mr. Brackman?
Well, they would constantly argue. We would see it in class all the time. It was really disruptive.
Now let's talk about one of those arguments you observed. Who generally instigated these arguments?
Well, from what I could tell, it was normally always Avery.
Was there any argument in particular that stands out to you?
There is this one argument where Avery and Coach, they were just going at it, and they always do this, but it just reached this like tipping point.
What do you mean by that?
After they were arguing, she stormed out of practice with something in her hand that we later found out was a permanent marker.
What happened next?
We found out that Avery had written Worst Attorney Award on Coach Brackman's Porsche, and it wouldn't come off. It ruined the paint.
Let's talk about what happened after Mr. Brackman's car was vandalized by the defendant. How was the team affected by this?
Well, sadly, we lost Avery as a team member. She tried to excuse it by saying that it was a dry erase marker, but Sharpies and dry erase markers don't look anything alike.
What happened next?
Well, Avery texted me. She was pleading with me to try to get her back on by talking to Brackman.
Did you do that?
I tried my best. I gave Coach the most impassioned plea that I could imagine. It was everything I could do.
Were you successful in getting her back on the team?
Sadly, I wasn't. I really tried my best, but he was just having none of it after everything that she had done.
Let's talk about what the defendant texted you after you said this. Miss Burnett, could you please bring up Exhibit 14? Could you tell us what the green messages mean?
Yes, the green messages is what I said in response to Avery.
And the gray messages?
The gray messages is what Avery had sent me.
What happened next?
Well, I texted her that Coach was just having none of our convincing, and she responded off about how if he's still upset about his car, then he's going to be really upset about what I do to his house.
Miss Burnett, could you please stop screen sharing? Thank you. What did you say in response?
I told her it wasn't a good idea. I mean, to be thinking of vandalizing a house isn't just some prank. It's a terrible idea.
Then what happened?
Well, I later found out that my coach's house was broken into and trashed. And then I found out that my coach was murdered.
Thank you. No further questions.
Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Before I begin, may I please have a time check?
Certainly.
I believe that you have 8 minutes and 32 seconds left.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, counsel.
Good afternoon, Mr. Fuentes.
Good afternoon.
Before we begin, I'd like to offer you my condolences. I know losing your coach must be hard for you.
Thank you. It is. It's really hard.
I'd like to start with your time on the mock trial team. You were on the CHS mock trial team since your freshman year at the same time as Avery Becker, correct?
Yeah, Avery was actually the one who convinced me to trial, and so I've been on it for 3 years.
And you claim that you and Avery were best friends and teammates who supported each other.
I think all my teammates are my best friends, and we all support each other so much.
However, you said that Avery was coasting on her good looks and didn't have any real talent or skill.
Objection, Your Honor, relevance.
Response?
Yes, Your Honor. This is relevant information as it goes to relationships on the team between suspects, as well as a motive, because there is a genuine question about whether Alex Cifuentes had fabricated the messages we were about to see.
Motive, bias, or prejudice may always be explored to some extent. The objection's overruled. You may continue.
Thank you. And you considered Avery's success in mock trial as a slap in the face.
I considered it a bummer. We all wanted it, but it was just what happened. She was successful.
And you thought that the team would be better off without Avery?
Well, I thought the team was really good with Avery. She won a lot of awards. However, she did disrupt class and she stressed all of us out immensely.
And you were excited for the new and bigger role you would have on the mock trial team with Avery gone?
Well, I've always been excited for senior year, which is this year, when I would have been the top of the team and gotten any choice of roles.
And after Avery was taken off of the team, you saw each other at a local hangout known as the Fry Shack, correct?
Yeah, all of the mock trial members, we were really hungry, and so we all went to grab a bite to eat.
And she was kind enough to let you play a new game on her phone.
It was so sweet of her. I didn't have that game, and so I played like about a minute of that game. It was just really nice of her.
And this was right before she left the Fry Shack with Taylor.
I didn't see them leave as I had gone off to go eat some food.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to what happened after the incident. You were called in for an interview at the police station, correct?
It was probably one of the worst phone calls of my life. I mean, that's when I found out that my coach had been murdered.
And the purpose of this interview was to investigate text messages on your phone?
I'm sorry, you were glitching. I couldn't hear you. Could you repeat that?
Of course, my apologies. The purpose of this interview was to investigate the text messages on your phone.
I was just told that they wanted to talk to me. I didn't know exactly why.
However, at the interview, a large topic of conversation became the text messages on your phone.
Well, as what happened was exactly what I was texted. It was a very huge conversation that I knew I had to tell the police.
However, this phone was left behind at your home during the time of the interview?
Well, you see, when your parents are yelling at you to get to an interview where you're going to go talk about your coach who was murdered, it's really hard to remember every little detail and thing to bring with you.
I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit 14. My co-counsel, Ms. Farrell, should be screen sharing that. Now, I'd like to discuss an inconsistency between the statement that you gave to the police and the text you claim to have exchanged with Avery Becker. You told the police that Avery had asked you to convince Brackman to let Avery back on the team?
Yeah, as you can see, it says I was just hoping that you could talk to Coach Brackman about having me back.
And you went and asked Brackman?
I did. I was right there, and I asked him immediately, made the most impassioned plea.
And Mr. Brackman said no?
He was really having none of it. I mean, in my opinion, I thought it was everything else that led up to this moment and this moment. He's not an easy one to anger.
And you told Avery that the answer was no?
I did. As you can see, I said, I don't know. Coach is pretty upset with you.
And that was when Avery talked about trashing Mr. Brackman's home?
That was actually before she talked about it. Right after that, she continued to try to convince me.
Oh, but Ms. Cifuentes, in Exhibit 14, the messages you claimed to have exchanged with Avery Becker, you say that you are going to ask Brackman in the future
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Overruled. She may be asked questions about the statements that are contained in this text exchange. Go ahead, counsel.
Would you like me to repeat the question, Mr. Fuentes?
I didn't hear you finish it.
Okay. In these text messages, you say that you are going to ask Brackman in the future about letting Avery back on the team. And yet, without knowing, Brackman's answer was Avery threatens to trash the house.
Well, I said I could try, but I did do exactly that. I tried my hardest, but even this little information set her off, and I was scared to let her know more.
So in version 1, you asked Brackman and Avery makes a threat. And yet in version 2, you haven't asked Brackman and then Avery makes a threat.
Well, as I said, I did ask Coach Brackman, but I did text this before. And as she had already gone off about how she's going to go vandalize his house, I didn't think it was wise to tell her that he said no for sure.
Ms. Fuentes, that wasn't my question. I'm saying in your statement to the police, you told Avery, Mr. Brackman's answer, that he was not going to let her back on the team. However, in these messages, Avery has already made the threat before you had let her know of Mr. Brackman's decision.
Well, I guess it gets a bit muddled at exact times when I'm telling them. When I was telling the police, I mean, I was really distressed.
So your statement, as well as these text messages, are inconsistent. So the question I have for you is, was your statement to the police untrue, or are these text messages fake?
These text messages, I don't even know how to fake text messages. I mean, my friend one time changed the time on my phone and I wasn't even able to change it back. So I wouldn't even know how to fabricate these questions, these texts.
Avery claims that you faked these messages?
I don't know what Avery claims, to be honest. She hasn't talked to me in a while.
And now, don't text messages usually include dates and times?
I'm really not sure. I don't know enough about phones.
However, none of these alleged messages that you claim are authentic have dates or times on them, do they?
Well, these are authentic as they are exactly what I had on my phone. And I don't have dates and times, but I'm not sure why the phone didn't update that.
And now you claim to no longer have this crucial piece of evidence, your phone, in your possession?
Well, you see, this phone always had to be on the charger. I couldn't practically take it anywhere. So it was impractical to keep it with me. So we got a new phone.
So in the end, Avery says that these messages were faked. And because you got rid of your phone, there's no way to prove that these messages were real.
I had no idea that she thought it was faked until now, but these are exactly what I had on my phone.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Redirect, if any.
Yes, Your Honor. Briefly. Mr. Fuentes, could you explain more to the jury about the plea you made to Mr. Brackman after Avery asked you for help getting back on the team?
Yes, well, I was in the room with Mr. Brackman. We were going over some last minute questions. And so when I got these text messages, I asked him, I let her know, but I guess I forgot exactly where I was and everything. And I didn't know how she would interpret it.
And Ms. Fuentes, are these the accurate messages that you sent or that you were sent and received in that conversation?
These are 100% what I got on my phone. I sent screenshots of them. I don't know how to fake any kind of messages.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right, thank you. Does the prosecution have any other witnesses?
No, Your Honor.
And does the prosecution rest at this time?
Your Honor, before the prosecution rests, excuse me, we would like to make sure Exhibit 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12, 14, 16, and 18 have been admitted.
Any objections to any exhibits that we hadn't already discussed?
No objection, Your Honor.
Thank you. Those exhibits have been admitted.
Thank you, Your Honor. The prosecution rests.
Thank you. Does the defense wish to call any witnesses?
Yes, Your Honor, the defense would like to call Avery Beckers to the stand.
Thank you. The witness is already under oath. You may proceed whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Can you state your name and spell it for the court?
Yes, my name is Avery Becker, and that's spelled Averybeckerer.
I'd like to start with some background information. What is your relationship to Mackenzie Brackman?
Well, Coach Brackman, my apologies. Coach Brackman was the coach on my mock trial team at Colorado High School. I did mock trial for a good amount of time in high school, so Coach Brackman and I knew each other pretty well.
When did you join the mock trial team?
I joined my freshman year, and then I did it all 4 years of high school.
What was mock trial like with Coach Brackman?
Mock trial was really fun for me. I was on a successful team. We won regionals, and we would have gone to state. And I did it for all 4 years of high school, so I'd say I was really committed to it.
How was Brackman as a coach?
For starters, I just want to say that I was completely shocked and saddened to hear about what happened to Coach Brackman. But if I have to be honest, Brackman and I didn't always see eye to eye on everything. You know, he constantly kept us after practice going over the same thing over and over again. But, you know, he was a pretty good coach, and he got us to a place where we were competitive. And I could tell he cared a lot about his students.
Narrative.
Just try to answer only the question that's asked and nothing more. You may continue with your examination.
How many times have you been to his house for mock trial or otherwise?
I've never been to Coach Brackman's house. I didn't even know where he lived.
And now let's turn to your relationship between you and Taylor Perkins. Who is Taylor?
Taylor was my best friend on the mock trial team. Usually we used practice as a fun way to hang out with each other, text each other, normal things that teenagers do at after-school activities.
And how did Coach Brackman respond to this?
Well, Coach Brackman seemed to get a little upset whenever he thought that Taylor and I weren't paying attention. And he actually ended up demoting me down to the B team because I guess he felt that Taylor and I could work better if we were on separate teams.
I'd also like to discuss your relationship with Alex Cifuentes. What is your relationship with Alex?
Well, Alex was one of my teammates on the mock trial team. I wouldn't really consider us to be best friends or anything. We never really got along.
What was it like being on the team with Alex?
Well, personally, I felt that Alex wanted me off the team so that they could be named best attorney.
And what was the nature of your relationship outside of school with Alex?
Well, like I mentioned before, Alex and I weren't best friends or anything. So those text messages that Alex claimed I sent, I never sent those.
Now, let's focus on what happened when you got removed from the team. What was going on beforehand?
Well, honestly, I was pretty upset because Coach Brackman never gave us any of the credit for the work we did. He constantly criticized my work and the work of others. And like I mentioned before, he ended up demoting me down to the B team, which I felt wasn't good for the A team.
Why were you from the team?
That's somebody.
My apologies, I didn't hear the question. Could you repeat it?
Yes. Why were you removed from the team?
I made one of the worst mistakes after practice one day. I was at the whiteboard we used to outline good and bad things we do at competitions, and I got frustrated with a couple of—
Your Honor, the witness's answer contains narrative.
I think that it was an open-ended question that is still within the scope of the question. You may continue with your answer, but keep it to what the question was asked.
Of course, Your Honor. Should I start from the beginning or should I just continue where I left off?
You may continue.
Okay. I was at the whiteboard we used to outline good and bad things we did during competitions, and I got frustrated with a couple of the comments that Coach Brackman made about me, and I ended up writing Worst Attorney Award on the hood of his car.
What were you thinking in that moment?
In that moment, I wanted him to know exactly what I thought, and I wanted him to know exactly how angry I was. But in hindsight, looking back, it was a stupid, stupid decision. That wasn't what I thought, and I never should have done it.
What happened afterwards?
Well, turns out I made an even bigger mistake because the marker I had used to write on his car was a permanent marker. And when Brackman found out, he kicked me off the team for good.
What did you do afterwards?
Well, obviously I was upset. I'd put 4 years of hard work into the the team. And regardless of what I had done, it felt really bad that it was all crashing down. But my mom told me to calm down and go apologize.
Finally, the prosecution introduced testimony about the alleged whereabouts of your phone, and I'd like to talk to you about your phone and when you last saw it. When did you last see your phone?
I last saw my phone on March 5th, and I haven't seen it since.
And where do you think you lost it?
Well, on March 5th, Taylor and I went to the Fry Shack and then we went to the mall. But at the Fry Shack, there were a bunch of mock trial people there, including Alex.
Was there any interactions between you and Alex?
Yes, I let Alex play a game on my phone.
What happened to your phone?
I woke up on March 6th and I realized I didn't have it.
What did you do to try to find it?
Well, I went over to Taylor's house and we decided to skip school in order to look for it.
What other ways did you try to find your phone?
Well, Taylor had his phone, so he kept calling my phone trying to locate it, but we assumed that it was either dead or stolen because it would go immediately to voicemail.
Finally, I'd like to talk about Blair Rollins. How familiar are you with Blair Rollins?
I guess I'm not that familiar with Blair Rollins, but they're a kid that went to my school and everybody knows who they are.
Did it appear to you that Alex and Blair were friends?
Yeah, they seem to hang out.
What do you know about Blair Rollins' relationship with Brackman?
Well, to my knowledge, I don't think Blair Rollins liked Brackman all that much.
Why do you say that?
Well, everybody knows that Coach Brackman lost the case that sent Blair Rollins' dad to jail.
Thank you. Are you aware of the ring videos?
Yes, I am aware of the ring videos.
In the video, there's a figure. Do you recognize this figure?
No, and I think it's crazy that people assume that the person in the video is me. It could easily be mistaken.
Your Honor, narrative.
Sustained. That is beyond the scope of the question. You may continue, though, with your examination.
Thank you. Does that look like anyone else?
Yes, it could easily be mistaken as Blair Rollins.
Why do you say that?
Well, you couldn't see the face, and anyone who saw me and Blair walking away could easily confuse the two of us. And now Blair's disappeared.
Thank you. Did you kill Mackenzie Brackman?
No, I did not kill Mackenzie Brackman.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Becker. I'm going to ask you some questions about your performance in mock trial. Now, you were on the mock trial team, correct?
That is correct.
And you competed in mock trial competitions, correct?
Yes.
And isn't it true scoring judges were like putty in your hands?
Yeah, I felt I was pretty good at mock trial. So yeah, I was pretty good at figuring out what the score was looking for.
Thank you, Ms. Becker. I heard a yes.
Yes.
Now, I would like to discuss your relationship with the victim, Mr. Brackman. You and Mr. Brackman didn't get along, correct?
True, we didn't always see eye to eye.
And you and Mr. Brackman would argue almost every practice, correct?
Yes, like I mentioned, we didn't always see eye to eye, but there were a few amount of practices where we did get along.
And a month before the regional tournament, Mr. Brackman started in on you again about your lack of preparation beforehand, correct?
Yes.
And then Mr. Brackman bumped you down to the B team, correct?
Yes, that is true.
And the B team was full of losers, correct?
Well, yeah, I guess so, because the B team was full of people.
Ms. Becker, I heard a yes.
You are
Now,
correct.
I'm going to discuss your relationship with Mr. Perkins. You and Mr. Perkins are best buds, correct?
Yes, that is true.
And you told Mr. Perkins that you had been bumped down to the B team, correct?
Yeah, of course. Taylor and I talk about everything.
In fact, you two are such good friends that Mr. Perkins quit the team to put you back on the A team, correct?
Taylor felt bad for me, I guess, and for the A team, so I can't know why Taylor quit.
But Mr. Perkins quit the team to put you back on the A team, correct?
I don't know why Taylor quit the team. All I know is that Taylor relayed the information to me that he felt bad for the team and felt bad for me. But I can't know if there were any other reasons as to why Taylor did what he did.
Thank you. Now, on March 6, 2020, the day of the murder, you skipped school, correct?
That is true. I was looking for my lost phone.
And Mr. Perkins is the only person who is testifying to seeing you on March 6th, correct?
Yes, Taylor was with me the entire day.
But Mr. Perkins is the only person that is testifying to seeing you on that day, correct?
Yes, I guess, but it's not like I'm going to
Thank
have a
you.
stranger
Yes.
testifying for me in court.
Thank you, Ms. Becker. I heard a yes. Now I'd like to discuss the mock trial practice after regionals. At that practice, you were angry at Mr. Brackman, correct?
Yeah, I was.
And isn't it true that you were so angry you stormed out of practice?
Yes, I was upset with the comments he was making towards me.
And you saw Mr. Brackman's obnoxious white car, correct?
Yes, and in that moment I did say
Thank
it was.
you, I heard yes. And you vandalized Mr. Brackman's car with a permanent marker, correct?
Objection, improper character evidence.
Overruled. I'll allow that question, but please try to restrain your answers to just the question asked. Go ahead, counsel. You can restate the question.
Yes, Your Honor. And you vandalized Mr. Brackman's car with a permanent marker, correct?
At the time, I didn't know it was a permanent marker, so I assumed it was
a permanent marker, correct?
What was that? I'm so sorry. I didn't catch what you said.
But it indeed was a permanent marker, correct?
I later found out, yes.
And you wrote worst attorney award with that permanent marker, correct?
Yes, but I shouldn't have done it. It was a mistake.
And you stood there afterwards thinking how what you had done would show Mr. Brackman what you really thought of him, correct?
I wasn't in the right frame of mind when I did anything that day.
Yet you stood there thinking how what you had done would show Mr. Brackman what you really thought of him, correct?
Yes, when I was not in the right frame of mind.
And isn't it true, afterwards, Mr. Brackman started to apologize to you?
Yes, that is true.
But then, after he saw what you had done to his car, Mr. Brackman kicked you off the team.
Of course, rightfully so, I believe.
And that made you even madder, correct?
Yeah, at the time it did because I was.
Thank you. I heard a yes, Ms. Becker.
And I was.
Isn't it true? Excuse me, did I hear an objection?
No.
No, the witness kept answering. Your counsel will ask you additional questions if she chooses to do so. You may continue with your cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. And isn't it true you would get back at Mr. Brackman if it was the last thing you did?
Yes, that was something I said when I was not in the right frame of mind. Again.
No further questions at this time.
All right, thank you. Redirect exam.
Redirect.
All right, thank you. You may call your next witness.
The defense calls Taylor Perkins to the stand, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. The witness is already under oath. You may proceed whenever you're ready.
All right, good afternoon, Mr. Perkins.
Good afternoon.
Could you state your name and spell it for the court?
Taylor Perkins, TaylorPerkins.
You're going to need to get your volume up a bit more, Mr. Perkins, so that everybody can hear. So either move closer or move your volume up or raise your voice a little. Go ahead, counsel. You may continue.
All right, thank you, Your Honor. Can you start by telling us about your connection with this case?
I was on Montana High School with Avery, who is my best friend. We're both seniors.
All right. Mr. Perkins, not only are you permitted to, but I'm ordering to use your outside voice. You're very quiet and you need to be much louder. Go ahead. You may continue with your exam.
All right, and what was Avery's role?
Would you like me to restate?
No, we'll continue. Go ahead, counsel.
What was Avery's role in the team?
She loved it like nothing else. She always wanted to be a lawyer, and she was really good at it. But she did a lot of improvising and was not prepared most of the time, but she was easily the best lawyer on the team.
I'm sorry, just to clarify, is the connection for Mr. Perkins breaking up for anybody else?
He is. Let's do the best we can to keep going forward.
All right, just let me know if you want me to restate or question. Mr. Perkins. All right, and did Avery get along with everyone on the team?
She got along well with most of the people on the team, but some people were bitter about how well she was doing in mock trial.
Objection, Your Honor. Improper character evidence.
I'll allow it. You may continue.
All right, and how did Avery get along with Alex Cifuentes?
Not the greatest. On the surface, they were polite, but Avery was the star of mock trial, and Alex really wasn't, which caused some tension between them.
And how did you get along with Avery?
With Avery or Alex, sorry, you broke up.
All right, how did you get along with Alex? Sorry.
Alex always came as sincere or passive aggressive. Well, to me, at least.
Of course. Let's talk about what happened with Avery and the mock trial team. What happened before regionals to change Avery's status with the team?
She was extremely unprepared about a month before last year's regionals, and Coach Brackman lost it, so he demoted her to the B team.
After he demoted her, what did you do?
I left the team, so he would have to put A back onto the A team.
And whose idea was that?
100% my idea. Avery didn't ask me to do anything. I just knew it was the right thing to do.
We are having some connectivity glitches, so I'm not sure how we can correct it at this point, but let's just try to have everybody speak as clearly, a little bit louder, and perhaps just a brief pause between question and answer and question might get it a little better. Go ahead. Why don't you ask your next question, Counsel?
All right. Once Avery was back on, were there any more problems?
Coach Brackman and Avery didn't really get. Coach Brackman and Avery got into a fight, and Avery wrote on his car with a permanent marker.
Objection, Your Honor. Lack of foundation. The witness has not testified to how he knows the defendant did this.
Well, I'm going to allow it because we've already had testimony about it from the defendant. Let's continue.
All right. What did Coach Brackman do when he saw the damage to his car?
He kicked Avery.
And to your best perception, how did Avery react to that?
She was super sorry, and she apologized over and over again and texted everyone on the.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Overruled. I'm going to allow it. Let's continue.
All right. Let's talk about what happened after Avery was kicked off the team.
Well, we went to the fight shack and ran into the rest of the mock trial team, including Alex.
And what day was that?
I think it was March 5th. Well, it was March 5th, the day before Coach Brackman was killed.
Mm-hmm. And did Avery ever leave her phone out while you were at the fry shack?
Yeah, she got upset after talking with Alex and went to the bathroom, leaving her phone on the table. Alex didn't talk to me after that, but when Avery came back, we just left the fry shack.
When did you realize something had happened to her phone?
The next morning, Avery wasn't replying to my text when she was picking me up, and that's when we both realized she didn't have her phone.
Could you repeat that answer, Mr. Perkins?
We're having some technical glitch here again. I'm not sure if it's the witness's connection.
Your Honor, another teammate of ours has just offered to lend Mr. Perkins her computer for a time being, so if we could take a maybe 2-minute recess, that could resolve the issues.
All right, let's try to see if that helps. Let's stop the timer while we try this.
All right. All right, sorry. Yes.
Our teammate is on the way up.
All right.
Technical glitches appear to be just part of the day. My apologies for my technical glitch earlier. All right, I think I just admitted Mr. Perkins back into the room. Can you hear me okay, Mr. Perkins? Mr. Perkins, can you hear me? You need to unmute.
Mr. Perkins?
Oh, sorry. I'm back.
All right, could we test that audio for you really quickly, Mr. Perkins?
Yeah, of course.
You need to speak up again. Your volume's very low.
Okay, hi. Is it working now?
It's just quiet. Can you move a little closer to the microphone or turn up the microphone a little, the volume?
Mm-hmm.
Is this better?
Slightly. Can you do any more?
I think this is as good as I can go.
Okay.
All right, well, I'm all the way at 6th and Canyon, so pretend you have to speak loud enough to hear me from wherever you are.
Yeah. At the
All right.
unfortunate expense of your throat, you might have to yell a little bit.
Let's continue with our direct exam.
All right, are the timekeepers back on?
Yep, let's start again with the timekeeping.
All right, I will re-ask that last question. When did you realize something had happened to Avery's phone?
So we just got, it was the next morning. Avery wasn't replying to any of my texts while when she was coming to pick me up to go to school.
Much louder, Mr. Perkins. Come on now, you can do it.
Okay.
Go ahead, let's continue.
All right, and what did the two of you do after you realized it was gone?
There wasn't really anything going on that was important going on at school, so we just decided to skip school and just look for her phone at the price shack.
All right, did you at any point call Miss Becker's phone?
Yeah, that's how we're trying to.
Mr. Perkins, you have to almost shout if this is you being loud, because we're barely able to hear you. And although I'm old, my hearing's still pretty good.
We are currently fixing the problem, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Can you hear me better?
Oh, yeah, much better.
That's much better.
All right, let's
All right,
continue.
so I'll re-ask that again. What did the two of you do after you realized it was gone?
We decided that school wasn't going to be, there wasn't anything important going on at school that day. So we just decided to skip school and go look for her phone at the Fry Shack.
All right, and did you call Miss Becker's phone?
Yeah, we used my phone to try to call it, but it just automatically went to voicemail.
Sorry, somebody just walked in. When did you find out Coach Brackman was dead?
The same exact time as the rest of the mock trial team.
And did you and Avery discuss Coach Brackman's death?
Avery and I talked about it, but we had no idea.
Objection, Your Honor, hearsay.
Response?
I'll move on, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Finally, I'd like to talk about Blair Rollins. Do you know Blair Rollins?
Blair went to CHS with me, with us. I wasn't really friends with Blair just because I thought they were kind of weird.
And what was Blair's reputation in school?
If I our school, you would they basically tell you they're the most kill someone.
You
Sorry,
completely broke up.
Yeah.
Try that answer again.
Could you repeat that?
Of course. So at CHS, if you asked 50 people, they would tell you that Blair was most likely to kill someone.
Objection, Your Honor, improper character evidence.
Sustained. You can move forward.
All right. Did you ever see Blair and Alex together?
All the time, yeah.
Do you know if Blair knew Coach Brackman?
Objection, Your Honor, speculation.
Overruled. If you know, answer, but don't guess or speculate.
Yeah, Blair knew him.
Why do you say that?
Well, everyone knows that Brackman lost the case that sent Blair Rollins' dad to jail.
Was Blair Rollins in school on March 6th?
No.
Have you seen Blair Rollins since Coach Brackman's death?
No, Blair pretty much just completely disappeared.
Finally, is there any way Avery could have killed Coach Brackman?
No, she was with me the entire time.
All right. Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
Cross-examination.
Your Honor.
Your Honor, may I proceed?
Yes.
Mr. Perkins, I would like to begin by asking a few questions about your mock trial team. Isn't it true that you thought Mr. Brackman was a mediocre coach?
He wasn't the greatest, but he's what we had. So, yeah.
You did think, thank you. You also thought he made bad choices for the team, correct?
Yeah, like demoting Avery. That was his worst decision.
Miss Becker drove Mr. Brackman crazy, correct?
Yeah, they just really didn't see eye to eye.
Isn't it true that their little feud did bother Miss Becker?
Yeah, it did.
It bothered Miss Becker enough to play some pranks on Mr. Brackman, correct?
Yeah.
Now, onto the subject of one of those pranks. Isn't it true that you heard about the practice where Miss Becker vandalized Mr. Brackman's car from Miss Becker?
Yes, Avery just told me all about it and about how
horrible she felt for doing it.
Miss Becker wrote Worst Attorney Award on his car, correct?
Yeah.
And she wrote this in permanent marker, correct?
Yes, but she had no idea it was permanent marker at the time.
Isn't it true that Miss Becker was then kicked off the team?
Yes, she was kicked off the team.
We're having a little connection issue again. It's sounding a little bit like a Stephen Hawking speech, but I don't know if there's anything you can do with that, Mr. Perkins, but let's try to muddle through this if we can. Go ahead, counsel.
After Miss Becker was kicked off the team, you discussed ways she could get back on the team, correct?
Yes, we did. She tried texting everyone about it to see if they could help her back on.
She texted everyone on the team, correct?
Almost everyone. Yeah, basically.
Isn't it true that Miss Cifuentes is a member of this team?
Yes.
Now, back to the subject of Miss Becker. You and Miss Becker were best friends, correct?
Yeah, of course.
You even quit something you were pretty good at in support of Miss Becker, yes?
Yeah.
Isn't it true that you and Miss Becker realized that she was missing her phone on the morning of March 6th?
Yep.
You ditched school that day and ended up retracing your steps to find it, correct?
Yes, of course.
Isn't it true that you first went to the mall and checked each store you had gone to the previous day?
Well, we went to the Fry Shack to look for it, and
You
yeah,
first went to the mall though, correct?
yeah,
You then went to the Fry Shack, correct?
yes.
Miss Becker's phone was like Miss Becker's third kidney, never out of reach, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And yet she didn't notice its absence until the next day?
Well, yes, basically. She was just in such an emotional state after whatever happened between
Thank
her
you.
and Alex.
She didn't notice its absence all the way home from the Fry Shack?
No,
For the rest of that evening?
probably not.
Thank you, Your Honor. No further questions.
Any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right. You may call your next witness.
Your Honor, the defense would like to call Professor Blake Van Owen to the stand.
All right, the witness is still under oath.
Before we begin, may I please have a time check to see how much we have left for the direct examination?
Certainly.
9 minutes and 50 seconds.
Very good.
Thank you.
You may proceed whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Professor Van Owen. Would you please state your name and spell it for the court?
You're muted somehow. Yes. You shouldn't be.
Here, I'll quickly exit and then rejoin.
Wait, I got you. Come back. You were on.
Is it better?
I can hear you, but you'll need to speak louder or turn up your volume or get closer to the mic. All right, counsel, let's continue.
Thank you. Professor Van Owen, would you please state your name and then spell it out for the court?
Hello, I am Blake Van Owen, BLKEVANOWEN.
Thank you. And then for the court, can you all hear and see us clearly?
The volume could be a little better for the witness, but let's keep going.
Thank you. I'd like to start with your background, education, as well as experience. What do you do for a living?
Well, I'm a private investigator, a professor, and an expert witness in police practices.
And where did your experience in these fields begin?
I began in the Aurora Police Department that worked as a resource officer, security guard, and then went into some private investigation.
And what other qualifications have you obtained?
I've earned a master's degree in criminal justice, and for the last 5 years, I've been teaching about police practices and social justice at CU Denver.
And how does your education and experience relate to this case?
Hang on, I've just received something that could help my volume out.
All right.
Is this better?
Oh, yes. Night and day. Go ahead. You recall the question?
All right, Professor Beno, would you like me to repeat the question?
Hello? All right, we're good. Thank you so much.
Do you recall the
Professor
question,
Benowen, would you like me to
Professor?
repeat the question?
Yes, please. That'd be nice.
Okay, you don't need to hold the microphone up to your mouth. We can hear you better as it is. Go ahead. Restate a question.
Professor Van Owen, how does your education as well as experience relate to this case?
Well, I have the experience and training to recognize and examine the evidence of this case.
And what would you consider to be your fields of expertise?
Police practices, forensic evidence, and crime scene reconstruction.
And why do you consider these to be your fields of expertise?
Well, I've been accepted as defense expert in over 100 cases in the U.S. District Courts, with my expertise in crime scene reconstruction and general police investigation tactics, with a specialty in forensic evidence included in those 100 cases.
Thank you. Your Honor, at this time, the defense would like to admit Professor Van Owen as an expert in police practices, forensic evidence, as well as crime scene reconstruction.
Any objection or voir dire?
Yes, Your Honor. May I conduct a brief voir dire?
You may.
Professor Van Owen, isn't it true that you've never completed any official training as a crime scene reconstructionist?
Well, no, I have experience and I have done things that would give me the experience for those things.
Have you had any official training in the subject?
Well, I have
Objection, Your Honor,
experience.
asked and answered.
Overruled. You may answer that question.
Can you please repeat the question?
We've understood that you've stated you have experience, but do you have any official training in the subject?
I do not have any official training, but I do have experience.
Thank you. Isn't it true that you've only been admitted as an expert in cell tower analysis 5 times?
That is correct.
And you have no official training in cell tower analysis either, correct?
Besides my forensic training, I have not been trained in that one specific area, no.
Your Honor, while I do not object to Professor Van Owen being entered as an expert under general police investigation tactics, I do move to exclude his ability to give opinions within forensic evidence on cell tower analysis, as she has no official training in that subject.
Court finds that the objection goes to the weight of the evidence, not the admissibility of it. As I mentioned, the criteria of Rule 702 earlier. Court will overrule the objection. The witness may offer opinions regarding the cell tower as well as the other forensic investigation. You may continue with your direct exam.
Thank you, Your Honor. Professor Van Owen, how did you come to be involved with this case?
Well, I was hired by the defense because there was concern that the police investigation was being mishandled and done sloppily.
And once you were hired, what activities did you conduct?
Well, I reviewed the police reports and crime scene reconstruction conducted by Kyle Kuzak, as well as the cell tower reports and exhibits prepared by Detective Markowitz. Additionally, I conducted partial my own investigation in some areas I feel were neglected.
Thank you. Before we move on, just for the purpose of the jury and the court, would you please speak slightly slower so the court can fully understand what you're saying through the audio?
Yes, I will.
All right. I'd like to talk about the police's efforts to investigate. What did you notice?
Well, I noticed there was many inconsistency with the first investigation, such as the alleged murder weapon, the scene of the crime, and other clues that would have helped this case reach a much more concrete conclusion. Did that come through?
Can you describe, yes, you did. Can you describe your crime scene reconstruction?
Yes, I reconstructed the crime scene and analyzed how the murder of Mr. Brackman would have played out. This includes the appearance of the intruder, the murder weapon, the alleged scuffle, and how Mr. Brackman was stabbed.
And what did you determine about the appearance of the intruder?
Well, in Exhibit 12, the video shows the intruder's build could not have been much bigger than Mr. Brackman himself.
I'd like to talk about the alleged scuffle in this crime scene. How does this connect to the crime?
Well, we can't karma date a scuffle, so we have no idea if this was made during the crime. It could have been made years before this case was brought to light.
Now, what did you conclude about the Ring camera that Mr. Brackman owned?
While he did have a Ring camera, we weren't sure if the phone was connected to the Ring camera, or if it was, if the notifications were on, or even if there were notifications were on, if he had his phone or if he was paying attention. They could have been on and he could have ignored it completely.
Objection, Your Honor.
Oh, my apologies, please
Hold
continue.
on, there's an objection. The witness has been qualified as an expert, may offer opinions. The weight of it will be determined by the jury after listening to all the evidence. You may continue.
Thank you. And in your expert opinion, what do you think happened on the day of Mr. Brackman's murder?
Well, I believe that Mr. Brackman was stabbed from behind while seated with a knife the intruder had brought onto the scene. This indicates premeditation to commit murder and it points away from Avery Becker as the most likely suspect.
And in your expert opinion on police practices, do you believe that the prosecution's police investigation was conducted properly?
No, I think it was mishandled and done sloppily.
Thank you. I'd like to talk about what Avery and Taylor were doing that day. What did you find with the cell phone records?
Well, after looking at the cell phone records, while Avery's phone had been recorded near the site of the murder, cell phone tower 119 is consistent with Avery and Taylor's alibi for searching for Avery's lost phone. As Taylor sends calls to Avery's phone, cell tower data picks up these at similar times and places.
Let's move on to other possibilities of this case. I'd like to direct your attention to Exhibit 14. Co-counsel should be coaching that to you too. Are you aware of what these are?
Yes, these are the screenshots of the alleged messages between Avery Becker and Alex Cifuentes.
And in your expert opinion, is obtaining screenshots of messages if the original phone was available standard police practice?
No, I was stunned to find out that the prosecution had accepted the screenshots because most departments have the technology to easily upload them from a cell phone.
Narrative.
Overruled, but try to answer only the question asked, nothing more. You may continue, counsel.
Thank you. Professor Van Owen, in your investigation, did you find any other suspects for the murder?
I found several suspects, but one that stood out to me was Blair Rollins.
And Blair Rollins got your attention?
Well, a few months before Mr. Brackman's murder, Brackman had represented Jonathan Rollins, Blair Rollins' father, because he had been charged with murder. Rollins was convicted and sentenced to life in prison.
And how did you know that Jonathan Rollins had wanted revenge?
I had listened to a court proceeding from before Rollins was sent to jail.
I'd like to direct your attention to what has been marked as Exhibit 22. Ms. Farrell should be screen sharing that to you. Do you recognize this?
I'll get you back, Brackman, if it's the last thing I do.
Yes, I do.
And what is it?
It's an electric recording from Jonathan Rollins' court proceeding that I've listened to.
And is this a fair and accurate representation of said court proceeding?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, the defense moves to admit Exhibit 22 into evidence.
Objection or voir dire?
Objection, Your Honor. This would be hearsay, as this is an out-of-court statement and it is offered for the truth of the matter asserted.
Response?
Your Honor, this is an exception to hearsay, as under Rule 8033, this is a statement of the declarant's state of mind, as well as a motive to seek revenge against Mackenzie Brackman. It is also not being offered for the truth of the matter, but merely to show the flawed nature of the prosecution's investigation.
I'm going to allow the exhibit, the recording, but again, the jury will ultimately determine what weight to give it. Go ahead.
Thank you. Permission to publish to the jury?
Certainly.
The last thing I do.
And Professor Van Owen, what did this recording tell you about the case?
Well, this recording shows that Rollins had expressed his desire for revenge, and his child had also been in the courtroom at the time, meaning that they would have heard their father's wish. Their Roland also matches the build and height of Avery.
And do you think that this possibility, my apologies.
Oh, sorry.
You may continue.
In addition to all this, what I've just said is consistent with my expert opinion of Brackman being stabbed from behind.
And do you think that this possibility should have affected the prosecution's investigation?
Well, I think this was something worth knowing to bring Mr. Brackman to justice, but unfortunately the prosecution had failed to make an investigation of this possibility.
Thank you. Your Honor, I have no further questions at this time.
Thank you. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. Pardon me. Your Honor, at this time, I'd like to request a brief time check.
Certainly.
You have 10 minutes and 40 seconds left.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Oh, please. Go ahead.
Professor Van Owen, I'll begin with asking you some questions about your job. You've consulted on over 100 cases, correct?
That is correct.
And you've testified on behalf of the defense every single time.
Yes, I have, and I have a good reason for doing so.
Isn't it true you've been paid thousands of dollars to consult on over 100 cases exclusively against the police?
Well, I do expect to be paid for my services.
And in every one of those cases, it's been your opinion that the police have dropped the ball, correct?
Yes, the police do not always handle their job well.
Now I'm going to ask you some questions about the nature of your analysis. You were never at the crime scene, correct?
Well, it wasn't really my job to reconstruct the crime scene. That was the prosecution's job. It's not my fault that it was mishandled. So no, I did not visit the actual crime scene.
And until Ms. Becker was charged, you didn't see anything, did you?
No, I didn't.
However, you have showed up here to criticize what the police have done, true?
Well, after looking over what they have shown me and looking through the investigations and using my qualifications and experience, I think I can do so.
Ms. Van Owen, isn't it true you believe that the intruder in this case most likely brought the knife into the struggle?
Yes, I do.
You further believe that the state's theory that the knife came from the kitchen knife block is wrong, correct?
I do. The knife was built different than the knives in the block.
Isn't it true that there's no physical evidence at all that the knife came from outside the home?
Besides the knife being built different than the knives in the block, no.
And in the ring videos, the intruder clearly is not carrying a knife in his hands, correct?
Well, no. The intruder could have had it in a pocket or something, so it's not as apparent what they were trying to do.
Now, there was no knife sheath recovered from the crime scene, isn't that true?
That is true.
Additionally, isn't it correct that there was an open knife drawer in the kitchen?
Yes, that is correct.
And there were a multitude of knife sizes and brands inside of this drawer, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Now let's discuss the alternate suspect you mentioned, Blair Rollins. Just by looking at a yearbook photo, you came to the conclusion that Becker and Rollins are the same build, correct?
Not just a yearbook photo, but correct.
So did you do an analysis of every single other classmate of every Becker with respect to size and build?
No, I did not. That probably should have been the prosecution's job.
Now,
I did not
true
conduct
that
that.
you claim a more reasonable suspect would have been Blair Rollins?
Can you repeat the question? You glitched out.
Now, isn't it true you claim a more reasonable suspect would have been Blair Rollins?
I do claim that.
You heard the recording from the hearing of his father, Jonathan Rollins, correct?
That is correct, yes.
Jonathan Rollins is the person speaking in Exhibit 22, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Isn't it true you have no other information that Blair Rollins in any way threatened Mr. Brackman at any point in time?
No, but I think a father being sent to jail and...
Thank you, I've heard a no. Isn't it true that your suspicion is based truly, solely on the relationship between Blair Rollins and his father?
That is correct.
So following your logic, the children of all of Mr. Brackman's clients should be convicted as suspects?
Well, there's more evidence to back up Blair Rollins than all the people that have been wronged.
Now let's talk about the investigation. You claim that Detective Markowitz should have looked into additional suspects, correct?
That is correct. If we had more evidence of Blair Rollins, that would have been helpful.
And you conducted an extensive search in an attempt to locate Rollins, true?
That is correct. I thought it would be necessary.
You accused Detective Markowitz of not gathering enough cell tower evidence, correct?
That is correct. Cell tower evidence be finicky, so the more we have, the more accurate it could be.
You believe he should have gathered Miss Perkins' data, correct?
That is also correct, yes.
You believe he should have gathered Blair Rollins' data, correct?
Yes, the more data, the better.
However, you didn't gather any of that data yourself. Isn't that correct?
Yes, but it was not my job. I'm not part of the prosecution.
Now, you also accused Detective Markowitz of making us assumptions about the status of Mr. Brackman's rig notifications, correct?
Yes, I did.
However, you didn't check the status of those notifications yourself, did you?
I did not. It wasn't my job.
So you did not collect evidence to prove that the prosecution's accusation was false, correct?
No, I did not do what was not required of me.
However, you did conduct an extensive search to attempt to validate your own conclusion. True?
Yes, I think having evidence to back up what I've said is good.
Your Honor, no further questions.
Thank you. Redirect.
No redirect, Your Honor.
Thank you. Does the defense have any additional witnesses?
The defense does not have any additional witnesses, and at this time, the defense rests its case.
Thank you. Let's have closing arguments then for the prosecution.
Your Honor, before I begin, I ask that all remaining time be reserved for rebuttal.
Certainly.
Then I will begin. May it please the court?
Please proceed.
Your Honor, members of the jury, at the beginning of this trial, we told you that this is a case about bitterness turned brutal. We have a bitter defendant and a brutal murder. Now, in her opening statement, my co-counsel, Ms. Wu, told you that today the state would prove beyond a reasonable doubt each and every element of both crimes with which the defendant is charged, thus meeting the prosecution's burden, the burden of proof which lies with the prosecution in this case. Now, a number of these elements are undisputed, that this crime occurred in the state of Colorado on March 6, 2020, and that Mr. Brackman is now dead. The issue in this case is whether or not the defendant's bitterness led her to break into Mackenzie Brackman's home and in the process brutally murder her own coach. The evidence presented today showed that that is exactly what happened. First, we proved who committed this crime. Today, you heard from Detective Markowitz, who described the crime scene in detail. Detective Markowitz testified to seeing the body lying in a pool of blood, with blood splatter all the way up the wall and even on the ceiling. Detective Markowitz testified to seeing the knife used as a murder weapon covered in blood, and to collecting videos which show the perpetrator entering the side of the victim's home. Detective Markowitz also reviewed screenshots from the defendant in which she stated that she would get back at Mr. Brackman or that she would trash Mr. Brackman's house. And finally, Detective Markowitz testified that in her expert opinion, through the use of cell tower data, the defendant was clearly near the victim's home at the time the crime took place. Now, what happened? Today, you also heard from Kyle Kuzak, a crime scene reconstruction investigator. Ms. Kuzak testified that in her expert opinion, this was a case of a planned burglary gone bad. Ms. Kuzak testified that in her expert opinion, the sequence of events happened as follows. Mr. Brackman was alerted to the presence of an intruder through his Ring doorbell notifications. As the intruder broke into his home, he frantically searched for a weapon, grabbing the biggest knife he could find from the knife block in his own kitchen. When the intruder entered the home, the two fought over that knife. And Ms. Kuzak testified that in her expert opinion, the intruder was able to take the knife from Mr. Brackman and stab him with it, leaving him to die at his own front door. And finally, why the defendant did it. Today, you heard from mock trial team member Alex Fuentes. Mr. Fuentes testified to the defendant's increasingly aggressive behavior toward Mr. Brackman over the course of the season. Mr. Fuentes testified about the countless arguments between the defendant and Mr. Brackman. One such argument even escalated to the point of the defendant vandalizing Mr. Brackman's car and writing "Worst Attorney Award" on it. The defendant was then kicked off the team, and that's when the defendant's bitterness boiled over. The defendant texted Mr. Fuentes and made it clear to her that she was going to break into Mr. Brackman's home and trash his house. The defendant did exactly what she said she was going to do. She just didn't count on Mr. Brackman being home. The defendant demonstrated her pattern for impulsive and bitter acts, which escalated into this brutal murder. After being let go from the mock trial team, the defendant even stated that she would get back at Mr. Brackman if it was the last thing she did. Your duty as jurors here today is to evaluate the facts and evidence. The evidence supports that the defendant committed this crime. Accordingly, the state has met their burden of proof and proved each and every element beyond a reasonable doubt. As such, the state asks you to find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree and second-degree burglary.
Thank you. Defense, closing argument.
All right, sorry, just let me. First, I'd like to make sure that the court can see and hear me correctly.
We can. Proceed whenever you're ready.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you are here today to decide the fate of Avery Becker. The prosecution would like you to believe that they have proven beyond a reasonable doubt that she is guilty. They have not. Throughout the course of this trial, we have shown you that their investigation was sloppy, their evidence selective, and their case circumstantial. You heard from Detective Jordan Markowitz and Kyle Kuzak, who came to their conclusion that Miss Becker did in fact kill Mr. Brackman using limited evidence and sloppy technique. By all accounts, they seem to have decided that Miss Becker was the culprit before ever looking into evidence for her guilt. If they hadn't, they would have seen that other avenues should have been explored. They conducted an investigation that relied on text that could have easily been doctored and the location of a lost phone that was within the vague area of Mr. Brackman's house at the time of the murder. Much of their other evidence of the scene was irreparably damaged, casting further doubt on the investigation. To see just how mishandled this case was, one must look no further than the suspect never investigated. Blair Rollins, a student with a grudge against Mr. Brackman for putting her father in prison for life, who just so happens to be the same height and build as Miss Becker, who would have taken the same route to Mr. Brackman's house, and who was not at school on March 6th and who has since disappeared. However, the police declined to investigate this possibility, which isn't only worrying, but cast doubt on the entire case. If they just ignored the indications pointing towards Rollins, what else could they have missed? You then heard from expert witness Blake Van Owen, who further highlighted the rushed nature of the investigation and the flawed logic in the police's reconstruction of the scene. Her appraisal of the knife used to murder Mr. Brackman and of the alleged scuffle at the crime scene only cement the impression of an investigation that missed critical facets. She reminds us that the evidence doesn't point to anybody concretely, let alone the defendant. You then heard from Avery Becker herself and her best friend, Taylor Perkins. They let us in on what the prosecution is trying to claim to be the motive. The petty drama of a high school club. While Miss Becker and Mr. Brackman didn't always see eye to eye, the leap from frustrations to burglary and murder is a hard one to make. They also recount the details of where they were that day. Looking for a lost phone, a story that is soundly supported by the cell data records that the prosecution's own Detective Markowitz so kindly produced. Their testimony only proves what the prosecution should have known all along. Avery's alibi is solid. Her motive is questionable at best. And the only evidence linking her to the scene of the crime is a video of somebody with a vaguely similar height and build, a lost phone in the general area of Mr. Brackman's house, and texts that nobody other than Alex Cifuentes, who never liked Avery, has ever seen. But then the question becomes, how did Mr. Brackman die? Could it have been at the hands of Blair Rollins, revenge for a father's life sentence? We don't know. Could it have been a setup by Alex Cifuentes to get rid of a longtime rival? We don't know. Could it have just been a tragic accident, the result of a random home invasion gone wrong? We don't know. And there's a reason for that. Because this case was gravely mishandled, the blame for this crime is being laid on the wrong person, and true justice may never be found. The prosecution must prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Avery Becker killed Mackenzie Brackman. They have not done this. The case for Avery's guilt is circumstantial. The evidence for Avery's guilt is selective, and the investigation into it was sloppy and rushed. For a conviction, the questions of Alex Cifuentes and Blair Rollins, of the lost phone and the missing texts, must be answered. And failing to do so, the prosecution has also failed to meet the burden of beyond a reasonable doubt. The only thing more tragic than the death of Mackenzie Brackman will be to send one of his own students to prison for a crime that she didn't commit. And for that reason, we ask you to declare the defendant, Avery Becker, not guilty. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Rebuttal closing with any remaining time.
Thank you, Your Honor. Selective is hiring a professional second guesser who never investigates a crime scene, but only criticizes those who do. Selective is Professor Blake Van Owen only searching into the one conclusion and one suspect he wanted to find. He extensively searched into Blair Rollins, but provided no investigation into the defendant who is being charged with the crimes today. Circumstantial is the defendant losing her phone the day before a murder occurred. We know that the defendant committed this crime, and as such, remember that this is a case about bitterness turned brutal. Find the defendant guilty. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, everybody, while the scoring judges are getting their scores together, and we are a little bit over, I apologize again for my lost connection, but technology, as we've seen, isn't perfect in this pandemic time. We're doing the best we can. I do want to applaud everybody. I think this is the 12th year that I have participated as a judge, presiding judge in these mock trials. And I am always, always impressed by the quality, the level of professionalism, the fact you guys know your rules of evidence, the presentations. I would have been terrified to do this, I think in college, let alone high school. So the fact you guys can do this, whether you ever choose to become lawyers or anything else, is fantastic, because the confidence I'm sure you gain from this will serve you all very well in the future. Because we have gone a little over time, I would like our scoring judges, once you've done your scoring, to give only about a minute worth of comments and maybe make them as general as you can. So Judge Mallard, first, thank you for taking over when I went down. This was actually Judge Mallard's courtroom when she was on the bench. So I stole her courtroom after she retired. But Judge Mallard, Mr. Hughes, and Ms. Tyler, whenever you guys have finished your scoring, if you'd give some very brief comments so we can move on. I'm also scoring the next session, and I'm sure these folks have other things they need to do. So just chime in and whenever you're ready. Judge Mallard, are you ready to go?
Sure. I was just, first of all, to all the participants, I'm very impressed that you guys have a certain poise that I don't think we had when we were your age and in high school or college even. There's a certain amount of poise and confidence that just kind of makes me really zero in and listen to you. And all of you had that. So across the board, demeanor was great. Some of your questions were really insightful, and some of them were a little off the mark. Some of your objections were really insightful, and some of the objections were a little off the mark. But you're just learning, so of course that's going to be the case. That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Hughes or Ms. Tyler, are you guys ready?
I'm ready, Your Honor.
All right, Mr. Hughes, why don't you go, and then Ms. Tyler can wrap.
Well, clearly these are two excellent mock trial teams, and you guys really went head to head today, and it was a tough decision for me as a juror on this. And I really want to applaud you for working through all the technical issues and not getting flustered by them. I think you did better than a lot of lawyers I've seen deal with similar issues. So great job with that as well.
Thank you. Ms. Tyler?
Yes, I thought everyone also did a great job, especially just exhibiting good professionalism during all the technical difficulties. Generally, I thought everyone had good pacing when speaking. I think the use of hand gestures sometimes doesn't always work as well virtually as it does in person. But I thought that the witnesses sounded good, and I thought that the attorneys on cross got some good concessions.
Thank you. Good luck to you guys in whatever you do. And I suggest keeping this up because you're terrific. And I'm sure if you continue, you'll just get better with time. So thank you so much for allowing me to participate by doing this. And I wish you all the best of luck going forward. If you're moving on to another room or competition, do so. I think I'm going to try to keep this room open for the next round and start admitting people if do I have the different teams or the same teams? I don't know if you know that. Looks like it might be different. So go on to whatever you need to, or stay if you have to. And I got to see if I have to admit more people.
All right.
Thank you guys.
Thank you very much, Your Honor.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Your Honor.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. We're okay to leave then?
Hello, Judge Butler. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Sorry. We're holding on to the round two, folks. Judge Mallard, I know Laura's still waiting on your scoring sheets.
Yeah, I'm bringing it.